Welcome to the Belonging Project podcast. This is Fiorenza and I'm your host. The purpose of this podcast is to bring voices together to talk about belonging. Through inspiring, real-life conversations, we explore how belonging can show up in so many different ways, what it feels like to belong, and the impact of truly belonging. Each episode will offer you inspiration and practical strategies to find your true voice in your life and as a leader. Let's dive in. Hi, Victoria. Welcome. How are you?
I'm really well, and it's great to join you. Thanks, Fiorenza.
Of course, it's my pleasure. I'm very excited to have you on the Belonging Project podcast today. We've been talking for a little bit more than a year, and we've actually met through social media. So I'm a big believer that there's so much goodness that can come out of social media. And I've been following your work on communication and cultural intelligence. And yes, I'm very happy that we can get to chat together today and deep dive a little bit more into those topics.
Yeah, I mean, do you know what? There is an amazing power that goes on in the world of, I think LinkedIn was a platform we met through, yes. But it's just amazing how many people I meet around the world. And yet it turns out, I think we're quite local to each other in London.
That is true. We are both based in London. And I must say that it doesn't happen often on the podcast to have a conversation with a guest in the same city. And yes, we could have actually done something to, have this actually in person, but for next time, I'll keep that in mind.
Great idea. Love it.
So, Victoria, I would love to hear a little bit more about what you do and also how Culture Cuppa came to life, if that's okay to start there.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I particularly specialize with helping global leaders, future global leaders and global teams with communication and cultural intelligence. And this is something I've been doing over the last 9 years. I work with individuals and teams all around the world, both just in that space of really understanding how does leadership communication work when you're working with people all over the world, but also with understanding how to bring teams closer together to build those kind of trust and collaboration factors. And the business has, although it's been 9 years, it has evolved massively in that time. And originally, when I sort of started this business that time ago, I was really focused on helping people who were relocating into London and helping them with the idea of how to communicate well, how to set up quickly, understand culture and all the different aspects of culture in the UK. But my original career was brand marketing, and I worked in quite large organizations internationally for over 12 years. I was primarily based in London, but quite regularly traveling around Europe, working with team members in the US, in India, in Europe. And so I'd had that sort of firsthand experience of what it was like to be a global leader myself, first of all, but also to, what are the great opportunities and challenges of working in those kind of international teams.
Wonderful. So it really sounds like your corporate career gave you some tasters of perhaps context in which it could work very well. The diversity of a team could work very well, and perhaps other contexts where there have been challenges. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely. Well, if I sort of roll right back, my sort of original interest in all things communication and culture really originated from the time when I was studying languages and loved languages, really enjoyed spending time abroad, studying, living, working, and spent sizable chunks of time in Germany and in Russia, and really kind of recognized that as much as I love language, actually what was really interesting for me was the cultural parts of communication. and recognizing that the way people talk, the way they express themselves was really quite different from culture to culture. So those were kind of like the early seeds of my interest in this whole area. But of course, when I started my marketing career, I really recognized working in these international teams that there were times when communication flowed, that things were going really well. We seemed to gel well together as a team, and we were able to really get our projects going. And there were just times when it didn't flow, when it didn't seem to kind of come together. And you'd end up having a meeting where you felt like you were repeating yourself. Like you thought, well, we've already talked about this. Why are we talking about this again? Or, you thought you'd had confirmation on something, but realized actually the action was still undone. And it was these moments that accumulated for me where I got really curious about, well, what drives this? Like, why do we have sometimes in teams this kind of flow going on with communication and getting things done and being able to kind of achieve our objectives? And why is it sometimes that we get into this kind of broken sense of communication? We're not really able to kind of almost understand each other, even if we think we're speaking the same language. And that's where I kind of discovered cultural intelligence, I suppose, in those very, very early days. And it's just all these little seeds that kind of led me to think, actually, there's an opportunity here. There's an opportunity to help people in this space where communication meets culture, where it's not obvious that people are not speaking the same language, but to bring them together is a really good opportunity for individuals, for teams, and for businesses.
Yeah, yeah. And you've mentioned, speaking the same language, but actually you're not, and there are some misunderstandings. It's something that I notice a lot with English being the business language, or even, English being the language that is spoken in the UK, but also in the US, right? Yes, same language, and lots of people can speak English, but actually there are also lots of cultural values that you carry with you, and that, to your point, will be expressed in the way that you're talking, even if, yes, you are speaking the same language.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting reflection, because these miscommunications or little moments of misunderstandings it isn't just about whether how fluent you are in English, for example. It's about the nuances, say, between me speaking English here in the UK and the style of English that I speak, compared to, say, in those old days of my team members in the US or my team members in Australia, and recognizing actually what I thought was super clear is not clear to others. And so you then layer on the fact that you've got people speaking English as second, third, fourth languages. And although apparently very, very fluent, there's a recognition that actually that doesn't mean we're all speaking the same language. And in fact, that's where, I'm a really passionate believer in, how do we really make sure that everybody has the same common understanding? How do we communicate in a way that is inclusive and that everybody does understand exactly what's going on without feeling outside that conversation?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And in your current work, have you worked with leaders that are coming across this challenge often?
Yeah, I think what comes up is that either leaders, no matter how senior they are, feel outside the conversation. They don't feel like they're fully included or fully part of what's going on. But also there is a sense sometimes of, what's their role in creating this inclusive space? And so, for me, when I'm helping clients, I'm talking to them about, well, is everybody very clear about how to communicate with each other? Sounds, again, very obvious, but sometimes you've got people using different channels and the information is split in different places and it's really difficult to get the common view. But there's actually also behaviors that haven't been agreed amongst the team around what's going to work best. So does everybody feel really comfortable jumping on a Zoom, jumping on a Teams meeting and just unmuting and saying what they think? Culturally, that can be really challenging for some people. They may have a more of a collectivist style of communication, which means they prefer to discuss things in groups before coming to the common view. They may be people who really struggle with disagreements, and so they're looking for the cooperative view rather than trying to find the challenges with something. You might have people, at one point I was working a lot with Japanese clients, and the idea of speaking up in front of others can be incredibly challenging, like particularly as an individual, and certainly without any sort of alignment with others first. So these kind of factors are quite important, for people I'm working with to understand teams will always be diverse. We need to make the most of how do we help others to contribute and add their valuable ideas? How do we make sure it's not that we're always hearing from the most dominant, the loudest voices in the virtual room? And that, I think, is a big responsibility for the leader to take on.
And we do expect the leader to lead those conversations most of the time. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts in terms of how could members of teams, perhaps that represent the less dominant side of things, how could they be encouraged to share their expectations or their preferences with the leader and the rest of the team?
Yeah. Well, I think it's first of all, understanding ourselves first, right? So sometimes we're not very, we don't really understand how culture is shaping how we show up. And that is an interesting point. So, I'm not just talking about national culture here. It could be regional culture. So I'm based in London. That's a very different culture than if I was living in Scotland, in the north, if I was living in a rural English village somewhere. These are two examples of culture. The fact that I'm a woman, my sexuality, the fact that I have a family, all these factors shape who I am and have cultures attached to them. And it's quite difficult to see our own culture. So I think for team members, it's about understanding yourself. When do you notice that you are in flow? What are your preferred ways to have conversations, to have disagreements? That's also quite an interesting one to explore. What is your preferred way to contribute in meetings? These might be questions people can reflect on and to try and identify their own style. There are certain profile tools that you can do out there to also get that feedback. I do one which is called the Cultural Intelligence Assessment that gives you feedback across 10 different factors around, how do you show up? What is the way that you prefer to do things? And that's to say you can't do things other ways. Of course, we're all able to adapt, but you really need to understand, first of all, where your starting point is. The second part of that, of course, then is being able to share that with others, to have the conversation around, well, I like to do it this way. You like to do it that way. You like to do it this way. How do we come to a common view? And that's something that can be really helpful to have a discussion and almost create like a sort of team communication charter about how you want to do things as a team. How do you make sure everybody is heard and that they've got those opportunities? So coming back right to the beginning of our point on this about unmuting, not everybody feels super comfortable doing that, particularly if it's a large group, particularly if there are more senior people in. Perhaps people have a relationship to power distance that they kind of feel like they should be listening to those more senior than them first before coming with their view. But it's kind of then recognizing, okay, are there other ways to share my view? Is there any way to contribute before the meeting? Are there other channels during the meeting rather than just unmuting? And even is an opportunity to contribute my view afterwards. So that can be kind of a way to think creatively rather than to say, well, it has to be just one way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Absolutely. So everyone in the team could actually have their voice heard. It doesn't have to be led by the leader, which is also something that is freeing, right? Because the leader may not actually represent everyone's culture, obviously, right?
Yeah, and as a leader, I would say that, really they have a big responsibility to appreciate and see, who are the different people in their team, to appreciate what the different preferences are and think about how they create those communication channels to allow for the full team to get involved. So taking that example as a leader, if you see that people are being quiet in the meeting room, that you don't hear from certain people, it's about maybe having that quiet conversation one to one. Maybe it's understanding, like, would it work better in breakout rooms? Would it work better through using creative tools like Mentimeter, where you can do word clouds and contribute ideas this way? There are many different ways to get people involved and participating. Just because they're sitting there quietly doesn't mean they haven't got really valuable ideas and opinions to share. And I think that's the really important point here, that we really want, as a global leader, to encourage everybody to be involved, to feel like they belong in the team.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's very much around the behaviors, right? How much inclusive the behaviors are. And that's how we can then have a place of belonging. We can then feel that we belong. Let's take this example that comes to mind. If we have a leader that perhaps is, themselves from a more collectivist type of culture, or in terms of the communication dimension, at least, what top tips would you have for that leader to, get started on their own self-work, but then also bring all that together for their team that perhaps, is made of more direct communicators?
Yeah. Well, I've sort of mentioned it starts with yourself. You really do need to understand how you show up. So if somebody's already recognized that they're collectivist, they like to kind of communicate in this way, then that's fantastic. It's then, having that curiosity about others, and we call this CQ drive or cultural intelligence drive, having that curiosity to then get the knowledge. That's the second part, CQ knowledge. And this is where it's really important to observe what's going on in the meeting room, to observe the team when they come together. What are those similarities and differences that you see in how people interact, how people communicate with each other? It might be that there are moments which somebody does something or says something that's really unexpected. Or, when you kind of get that email and you're kind of like, that really, like, what do they mean by that? Like, what are they like? Are they trying to sound like, are they angry with me, or what's going on there? And what we tend to do as humans is we tend to react really quickly to that. So we take an assumption from it. We kind of interpret what's going on through what we believe is kind of their motivation and drive, and then we kind of react back. But in reality, what we're trying to do with cultural intelligence is like put the pause button on. We're trying to take that step back and sort of say, well, that's how I react to this with my cultural kind of preferences and how I like to do things. But maybe it has a different interpretation for them. Maybe there is a different intention behind that style of communication or that style of or that behavior that I just don't see. And so I need to really ask myself, what am I not seeing? And, you can do research. There's lots of very widely available research around similarities and differences between different cultures. One example is Erin Mayer's Culture Map. It's a brilliant book. You can really deep dive into what the research says about different cultures. But we can't leave it there. That's only part of the picture. With cultural intelligence, actually, we need to go much, much deeper than that, because we need to go beyond the averages and the research kind of generalizations and get into, well, who's this human, this person, or this group of people that are in front of us? And that's when we need to get really nuanced and observe the actual behaviors that are going on. So coming back to your question, if you've got a global leader, a manager who's very collectivist, recognizing the difference that is perhaps more the team are more individualist, creating space around what would work well for them to contribute, so recognizing they like to speak up, share their opinions, to debate, have the conversations out loud, but also helping them to understand you and recognize what you need as well. So, what is important to you is that you might need to discuss things as a group before coming to your kind of final decision, that you value their opinions to shape your thinking and come to the final recommendation. So it is really an appreciation of what everybody brings. Yeah. And that's where the strategy part comes in, really recognizing what it is you might need to adapt, or what you might need to take into account when you've got a team that are quite diverse. And then the final part for cultural intelligence is really the CQ action. And I'm a very passionate believer in this. I think for me, it's absolutely about knowing what you're going to adapt. It's no point just having the knowledge and recognizing it. You've got to do something with that. And you've got to recognize that you've got to adapt to the situation, see what you need to change in your own behaviors and communication style, because we can't change others. That's not within our control.
Absolutely. And I really, resonate with taking action, something that is also important in my coaching work. Yes, it's so important to reflect. It's, crucial to create that reflective space for yourself. And then you need to action or experiment, because just the reflection is usually not gonna give you the answer or the results that you're expecting. You mentioned a few things around observing the team, just going back to the example we were talking about. In nowadays workplaces that are so often hybrid, and I mean a hybrid in the sense that someone may be based in London, the other person in Australia or in Japan, it does feel more challenging to be observing as much as you could if everyone was in the same open space. Yet it's great to have this flexibility. We don't want to go back. What are your thoughts in terms of still being able to have those rich observations and keep your hybrid way of working?
Yeah, so I absolutely agree with you, first of all, that hybrid remote working is a brilliant opportunity, and it allows us to be truly global. So it allows us to be really a truly global team, or a truly global leader of a team. And it comes with the challenges as well. So some of that is about understanding how you create different forms of communication. So I feel at the moment what goes on is that there is almost a increase in the number of meetings that goes into the calendar. And they're often about group meetings coming together to talk about projects and to move tasks on to get delivery and performance achieved. And that's great, because obviously if we can be more efficient and we can accelerate what we're doing, that's fantastic. But I also think it doesn't leave a lot of time for this observation or this connection. That's the other half of it as well. How do you connect with people that you never meet, or with people you meet maybe only once a year? And that is also a really important part of creating belonging, that sort of connection piece. So for me, what I think is that global leaders have that responsibility as well to make sure that the interactions, the meetings aren't just about the efficiency drive to get as much stuff done. There has to be some level of connection, which is about actually just getting to know each other, about understanding what motivates you and what motivates me, and what's going on in your life right now beyond the box that I see you in. And I think that actually requires quite a lot of intention and attention as well. I think, that means, for example, creating more, not just one-to-one time, but also kind of unstructured time for conversation, maybe as a team, more informal get-togethers. And the beauty of that is that it doesn't have to be done sitting down at a desk. I was speaking to somebody on my own podcast a couple of months ago, and they were talking about the idea of walking and talking. So having that time where actually as a team, you all are going for a walk in your separate countries, in your separate spaces, but you're outside. It's like taking a walk with the team, or with one-to-one if you choose to do it that way. And they get a little insight into where are you in the world? Like, what does that look like? And sparks other kinds of conversations. So For me, the hybrid remote working thing is fantastic, but it also comes with you have to take that intentional action to create the connection and the belonging, but particularly if you're not meeting up, say, ever or even just once a year, which I know actually is true for a lot of teams when they're based in different countries. So it really is also about, as an individual, whether you're a contributor or whether you are the leader of that team, how can you open up and share more about what's going on for you in your life? Because I think the more we share, we get that reciprocally back from the other person. They share more about themselves as well. So, we have to understand how far we want to go with that. But I think there's a real opportunity to create these connection spaces if we are intentional in setting them up.
I love that. I love that. All right, switching gears a little bit. I was thinking about your own journey and how you transition from corporate into having your own business. I'd love to talk a little bit about your own sense of belonging and perhaps how that shifted or evolved over the years. Any thoughts on that?
I think that's a brilliant question, because I was in an organization that was really quite large, very global, had large teams that I was working with in person. But then in addition to that, a huge number of support functions behind me. So whatever I needed, there was always somebody there to ask a question of, to help me with whatever I needed. And so when I first transitioned into setting up my own business, as much as it was exciting and I was really pleased to be doing this, and it was definitely the right step for me, I kind of recognized really quickly that how challenging it can be and how lonely it can be when you're by yourself and you don't have anybody to bounce things off, to have a conversation with, to sort of go check about, I don't know, like the tech's not working, my Zoom's not working today. Why would that be? Even basic stuff like this, things can feel quite disconnected, particularly if you're very used to being part of a larger organization, even if that's fully virtual. So I remember those first few months having that absolute thrill of setting up, but actually also that sense of, what on earth is going on here? I thought I was really experienced. I knew how to run businesses. I kind of felt like I really knew what I was doing, but there was that sense of like real disconnection as well. Yes. And I think in those very, very early days, what massively helped me were a couple of things. One was I actually recognized after about a few months that I was really needing a mentor. And actually that was quite hard, because I kind of had been done very well in my career. I'd reached a great level in the organization I'd been in marketing. But to suddenly realize that actually being an entrepreneur, running your own business, was a really different kettle of fish, a really different way of doing things. I suddenly realized that I didn't know how to do that. And I struggled with that identity a bit as well. Like I was finding myself almost trying to work in my old way as a business owner, and it didn't really work. So, I recognized that and was very lucky, had the opportunity to get a mentor through alumni network I was part of, and was really lucky to have that support for a year. So that was a really vital part of feeling plugged in, but also to have that almost mental support to help me on that journey, to help me also to recognize that my identity was evolving. I needed to evolve that identity. Actually, that was quite important. And then, the other part of it for me, I think, and a big part of, I think, what is really important if you're setting up your own business, is to create your own sense of belonging. And that might be for some people through networking, for example. So that was really important to me in the early days. I was part of women's networking groups. I've since then been part of global networking groups virtually. And these have been great spaces to feel part of community, to be with like-minded people, but also to learn from others and be inspired about how others are doing things, how they're running their businesses, what works, what lessons are there to be shared, and to support each other. There is something where if you're feeling like you're contributing to something, you can create that sense of belonging. So networking for me worked incredibly well. But, those are just two examples of how I created that sense of belonging. I think it can work for others in different ways. It might be being part of a co-working space. It might be about how you create belonging if you are a business owner creating a community, and how you do that with your own clients and the people that you bring together. I think there are many different expressions of that.
I really appreciate, a few things that you've mentioned and really resonate with them. One that you mentioned was how you were trying to work in your old ways, where actually the context had changed. And I think that's a great awareness to have. Certainly it took me a while to, recognize that.
Yeah. Well, it's a really weird one because it's the only way that I knew how to work.
Yeah.
So I found myself almost creating boundaries for myself that didn't exist, which is kind of quite strange, but it was the only way I knew. So actually, again, having those outside perspectives are really important because it then lifts you out and you can say, well, actually, this isn't the only way. There are other ways.
Absolutely. Community has been for me finding, well, not one community, but a few communities that I can be part of and that bring me that sense of even, something as simple as camaraderie, right? I actually need that to feel happy, just generally speaking, but also have that sense of wholeness, that belonging. And then, of course, you invest time in finding the right community. Then you find the other community that perhaps is more business-minded. It's a journey. I don't know if you would agree with that, but as a business owner, it's a journey as well to build, I guess, all the different things that you need to feel supported and whole, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And I think to add to that, I think what is also really important is to recognize like where do you need that most. So what I mean by that is if we go back to the question of being hybrid as a business owner, you can probably work as you wish. You can have that flexibility to be fully virtual. You have the flexibility to do some of your work in person. So when it comes to the sense of belonging, it's actually, well, where do you need that? Do you need that more from in-person networks where you have meetups and you're actually going somewhere and you're feeling people's energy and you're connecting to people in person to person in person? Or actually, does that not matter so much to you? And actually, it's more about the range of people and diversity of people you can meet around the world. So if I come back to, how we originally met, for me, LinkedIn is an amazing community. And I have met so many people that way, had brilliant conversations with people that I've gone on to do, have been on my podcast, that I've met and been on their podcast. And I've gone on to do actual kind of business collaborations together. And I think that is, again, for me, that works incredibly well. But I know myself, I also like to have some in-person networking as well. So I need that balance between the two. For some people listening to this, maybe that's not so important. Maybe for them, actually being fully virtual and creating that community and sense of belonging virtually is what works for them. So you've got to know yourself as well a little bit and what drives you and what the right mix is for you. And that can evolve and change over time.
Absolutely. It's something that I've discovered, yes, how actually all the communities I was part of, all my support groups all became virtual with the pandemic. And actually it worked very well at that time and for a little while after. And then I started to crave again that in-person connection and, how that could look like realistically having little ones. But you're absolutely spot on. It's very much about finding the right mix that works for you at that point in time and recognizing that it can change as well. There are things that a few things that I've seen and I'm like, oh, this is a brilliant opportunity. I really want to go. I really want to be part of this. And, there's a little bit of the hyperachiever kind of speaking sometimes and then having to sit back a little and be like, yes, I would love to do that. And I think just right now isn't the right time because it may actually lead to feeling overwhelmed. So I'm going to give myself 6 months or so and then I can revisit this.
Yeah. Do you know what? That's a really interesting one, because I think for business owners, that's that sense of you have all of the ideas and you want it done now. And like it feels like everything has to be done now. And there just isn't that pressure. The only person putting pressure on yourself is you. And that is the thing I've learned really the hard way, which is we are our hardest bosses sometimes. Sometimes we're not really kind to ourselves in recognizing what we're achieving and what we're winning at. And also like not recognizing that actually it doesn't all have to be done like in the next 6 months. There are things that can be captured, ideas that can happen, they can come later. And actually for me, that was also part of that transition piece from being a leader of a team, a leader of a business and a brand, to being the leader of myself. Actually, self-leadership is something that I don't think I naturally had when I set up my business. And I've had to really develop those skills to recognize that actually I need to lead myself as much as I lead others through all the different activities that I do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Victoria. It's been a real delight to have this conversation and compare different journeys and examples as well. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Fiorenza. I've really enjoyed the conversation and brilliant questions as well. So thank you so much for inviting me onto the podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you, Victoria.
You can follow the podcast on LinkedIn at the Belonging Project Podcast. You can also hit subscribe and stay up to date with our episodes. And do feel free to get in touch with me on coaching@fiorenzarossini.com. Thank you again and see you next time.